In today's video, I'm going to be going over what webhooks are and what purpose they serve for anyone trying to build an online business with no-code tools. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Connor, and on this channel I help people who cannot code build their own online businesses with no-code tools like Webflow, Airtable, and Zapier. So about 2 weeks ago, I released a video on this channel about how to use APIs if you don't know how to code. As a result of that video, I got a lot of follow-up questions from people wanting me to explain what webhooks are and what purpose they solve in the no-code space. And that is exactly what this video today is going to be about. I'm going to be going over what webhooks are, how they can be used in the no-code space, and I'm going to be going over some specific examples of how you can implement it for whatever workflows you are trying to set up. Now again, just like with the last video that I made about APIs, I just want to make a little disclaimer that if you are just getting into the no-code space, this right here is some of the more advanced stuff. I highly recommend checking out some of my videos on how to use Zapier or Airtable first, so you have a bit of context about what the specific video is about. But before we get into it, do me a quick little favor. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Also, if you could leave a like on this video, it would be very much appreciated, and I'll make more videos on how you can use code to really take your no-code projects to the next level. But without further ado, let's get into the first point, which is what webhooks actually are. So let's start off in Zapier so I can illustrate what exactly the no-code version of webhooks are. So whenever you're setting up a workflow in, say, Zapier or Integromat, you have to start off by defining a trigger event. In Webflow, specific examples of trigger events are things like form submissions, whenever a new order is triggered inside of your Webflow e-commerce plan, or whenever you update an order inside of Webflow e-commerce. An example of a trigger event inside of Airtable can be when a new record is created, when a new record is moved into view, or when a specific record is updated. Now, this is important because without any of those specific events, you won't be able to trigger the workflow. Now, every once in a while, you're going to be working with an app that doesn't have a specific trigger event set up inside of Zapier. In the event that a particular app doesn't have a particular trigger event that you can use from a predefined list, then you can use something called webhooks to basically create the code version of a trigger event. So a very Webflow specific example of a trigger event that is not available inside of Zapier but is available as a webhook is when a site is published. Now, if you jump into the integrations tag of your specific site project settings, you'll be able to see at the very bottom that there's a section called Add Webhook. So all you need to do is click on Add Webhook, and you'll see then that you can select from a drop-down a few additional options for trigger events. So we can see here that we have form submission, but we also have another one called site publish. So as soon as you select one of the trigger events, you'll be able to get all of the information about that particular event using a webhook. Now the question is, what actual steps are involved with actually getting that information about that specific trigger event? So we got to start off again inside of Zapier, and they have an app that is called Webhooks by Zapier. So in the last video where I discussed how to use APIs, we actually use Webhooks by Zapier to send information to the Webflow CMS API. And in this video, we're not going to be using the Webhooks by Zapier app as an action step. We're going to be using it as a trigger event. So as soon as you have selected the app, you'll be able to choose a trigger event. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be using the catch hook event. So from here, what Zapier is going to do is it is going to give you a URL that you can then use to copy and paste it inside of Webflow. So I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to jump over to my webhook section inside of Webflow, and then all I need to do is select the particular trigger event and then paste that webhook URL into here. So you can pick site publish, but for the sake of this example and demonstrating how it works, I'm actually just going to use the form submission trigger event. So all I do is just select that trigger type and then I paste in my URL. Now, as soon as I select that particular webhook, it will be added to my list of active webhooks, and I can then start testing it. So in order to test this particular workflow, I just have to go to a particular form inside of my project and just submit the form. Now, as soon as that form has been submitted, you'll be able to go and test the trigger. And then you'll see right here that the information that I submitted in the form was received by that webhook and is now laid out all of the data that I can now use in future steps. So in short, what Webhooks does is it basically does the same thing that trigger events do inside of Zapier. However, if a particular app doesn't have a trigger event, you can use webhooks as an alternative. So in the very specific event of Webflow, all you can really do with webhooks that you can't do with Zapier or Integromat is trigger a workflow when a site is published. However, with a lot of other apps, there are a lot more additional things that you can do with webhooks that you can't do with their native Zapier or Integromat integration. So a very specific example of where webhooks came in super handy for me was when I wanted to set up a trigger event for when forms were submitted inside of Jotform. So Jotform actually does have a trigger event for their native Zapier app where a new form submission is made. However, when I used it for the first time, I actually discovered that a lot of the information that was submitted inside of those forms wasn't actually passed through in the response that Zapier gave me for that particular trigger event. So again, here the process of setting up a webhook is pretty straightforward. You just jump into the integrations tab of whatever app you're using, and then you copy and paste over the webhook URL that Zapier provides you, and then just test that particular trigger event. And then once again, as soon as you have tested that particular trigger event, you'll be able to see that you get a response from that webhook URL with all of the information that was submitted when a form was submitted inside of Jotform. Now in this particular example of Jotform, you'll actually find that if you submit the form using the native Jotform app and the webhook URL, that you actually get different responses. And the response that you get from the webhook is actually a lot more detailed. So that is again another huge plus of why you should potentially look into using webhooks in certain instances. So if like me, you use Zapier to set up a majority of your workflows, you'll find that oftentimes a lot of the webhooks that a particular tool provides will also have the equivalent Zapier trigger event. But if you're using one of the newer automation tools and you don't have a native integration for that particular app yet, then you'll be able to use webhooks to basically create your own custom trigger events. So a fun little exercise to have a play around with is to just go and Google and see what kind of webhooks your favorite tools provide, and then see if Zapier actually has the equivalent trigger event, because if not, you'll be able to then use that particular webhook to set up whatever workflow you want. But that is it. That is how you can use webhooks to set up custom workflows in whatever automation tool you're using if they don't have a native trigger event for it. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please leave a like on the video, and please let me also know in the comments down below if you have any ideas for future videos where I can explain a coding concept for no coders. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll see you back here for the next one.